It's great to be in front of so many people, as I said this morning, who are dedicated to helping those on the spectrum lead fulfilling and productive lives to our greatest potential. And in particular, the musical aspect of things. So how many of you play an instrument or played an instrument? Oh, yay. A good bunch of you. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some methods and materials for teaching how to play a musical instrument to somebody on the autism spectrum, and we're also going to look at how we can include meaningful inclusion of people with autism throughout the music curriculum. So general music, chorus, various other ensembles, and we'll take a little look as to what's happening in the brain when we're looking at music. So we'll begin with a little bit about me. As I mentioned, things were pretty typical at first. Going way back to the beginning, at 24 hours of age, my wife says I looked like an egg. Then at 18 months, what I call the autism bomb exploded. And that's where I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and in short, I became a very autistic little kid. Now, in those days, there was very little known about autism. And eat up, you guys. Go for it. You need it. No, it's okay. A person's got to eat. We don't want you fainting in the... No, I'm all set, thanks. Okay. All right, good. So little was known about autism, and just fortunately my parents refuted the professional recommendations for institutionalization. So what do we do for people with autism? Where does autism come from? So on that note, let us sing to the tune of Where, oh, where has this little dog gone? Ready? Go. Where, oh, where did this autism come from? Together. Oh, where can it be? More from the tenor in the back. With mysteries cut long and eye contact cut short. Oh, where can it be from? I think we need a little work with intonation, breath support, and singing together. But we'll be ready for the concert at the end of the summer, which is just about now. So we're going to have to sing this tomorrow. So these questions are still here. And we're going to look at the question, what can we do for people on the autism spectrum? We know a lot more about what to do for people with autism, and in particular music. And as we know, music accesses a different part of the brain. And often we see people with autism increase verbal ability during and after exposure to music. So the more we can involve people in music, the better off we'll be, whether they have autism or not. We know that people with autism are born with a smaller corpus callosum, or many people with autism have a smaller corpus callosum, which connects the two halves of the brain. We also know that early exposure to keyboard music increases those neural connections. So you might say involvement in music is a no-brainer, and all the puns are intended. So, as I also talked about this morning, how can we look at autism as a collection of characteristics and reframe those characteristics by asking, instead of bemoaning what people with autism cannot do, what can people with autism do? What can the person with autism do in order to lead a fulfilling and productive life? And in terms of music, there's a lot that people with autism can do. So for me, my musical training began prenatally. There was music on in the house all the time, usually classical or folk music. And then after the autism bomb struck, my parents implemented what we would today call an intensive home-based early intervention program. And there was a lot of music at that time. Maybe today we would call it music therapy. But by then, Gene Ayers was just, they were just getting started with this stuff, and just the beginning of music therapy. And so it was really just parents doing what parents needed to do in order to connect with their child. At age 6, I had my first piano lessons. And I think the best thing I learned from those piano lessons was how not to teach a person with autism how to play the piano. So sometimes you can learn by negative example. Grade school, I was a social and academic catastrophe, bullying. Teachers didn't know how to reach me. It was only until middle and high school that I, realized that using words instead of sound effects from the environment really helped with social interaction. I also was able to engage in my special interest. Middle and high school is where you start seeing courses, classes, and activities based on particular interests. Music being one of those special interests, I then joined the band, where I now had a structured activity in which to mediate my interactions with others. I became such a music nerd, I'd spend hours in the music room, badgering the music teacher with all kinds of questions, and just kind of living in the instrument closet trying to figure out all the instruments. So that was great. Music is great for developing as an interest. And one of the reasons that I teach music to children with autism is that because in addition to all the therapeutic benefits that you get by engaging in music, how many people here are music therapists or studying to become music therapists? You was. Okay. A was music therapist. And all of those benefits, all of those secondary benefits, motor control, communication, taking turns, social interaction, all kinds of fun stuff. In addition to all of that, you're also developing a real-life skill in which to develop interactions with others as a musician, perhaps as a soloist, perhaps part of an ensemble. Also, music is just plain old fun. And finally, I haven't figured out how to teach typical kids yet, so I just stick with the ones on the spectrum. They make an awful lot more sense to me. Music is a sensory activity. And it's important to always be aware of the potential sensory issues that can come with engaging in music, whether it's creating the sound yourself and being overwhelmed, or playing in an ensemble of some sort and being overwhelmed by the sound of being in that ensemble. So that may dictate your choice as to what type of instrument that person will play. Actually, that person will probably choose the instrument on their own. And placement, and relatedly, placement in the ensemble, whether it's an orchestra or a band. So the person with hearing sensitivities, maybe you won't stick them in front of the trumpets. Maybe they'd be better off in the back, playing trombone or tuba, or maybe percussion. So involvement in the community, that's a very important aspect. Music became such an interest that once I heard that you're needing to learn all the instruments to be a major in music education, I was just, wow, I was all over that one. And continued studying all the instruments. College is where dating occurs. That's a whole nother presentation. And there you see my wife, who we met in college through a common interest of music. She was the principal harpist of the Beijing Symphony before coming to the United States to further her education. And now we've been married for over 24 years. So if you want to see more of what life is like on her side of the autism spectrum, you can read her contributions to my book, Beyond the Wall. And as I mentioned earlier this morning, I spend most of my time in a sheltered workshop for people with Asperger's syndrome, where we perseverate on tiny little subjects that nobody else cares about or many people have even heard of. Spend our lives doing that. Sometimes social interaction between community members could be improved. Some people refer to this place as a university. That's where you can find all your undiagnosed Aspies. So looking at the power of music. The power of music. No, it's ABC. Or it's Baa Baa Black Sheep. All or some of the above. So I play a little tune, and some of you, many of you, maybe all of you have done this in some way. Yeah, we got the pitch and we got the words, and how many of you tried to... Oh, this one, okay. Well, it's two of them. And it's like when you have two watches. If you have one watch, you know what time it is. If you have two, then you're never quite sure what time it is. So I put this one somewhere else, so I don't pick it up by mistake. So the power of music. You leave off the last syllable, the last word, the last note, and it's just going to cause the individual to want to come up with that last pitch or that last word. And if we want to look at it theoretically, that's known as system disruption, which is what we find from the approach of the Miller method, developed by Arnold Miller. The idea is that we all have relationships to objects, or expected relationships to objects, activities, people, ideas, and when we disrupt these relationships, such as leaving the last note off of a phrase, such as leaving the door open a little bit, and you may know some people on the spectrum who just have to have all the cabinets closed, because in a way that's a disrupted system as well. So instead of fighting against these things, let's use them to our advantage. And we can do that musically, because music is great systems. So as we think about the brain, I talked about the corpus callosum. If we look at other aspects of the brain, what is involved when listening to music, and even more so when playing music. So if you do a functional MRI, when someone is listening to music, the brain lights up like a Christmas tree. If you take a functional MRI, if somebody playing or even just remembering, going through their head, mentally practicing, that's when the fireworks go off. So it involves the entire brain. So music is very good for developing connections between the brain, and we know that one of the aspects of autism, one of the characteristics of autism, is that there's atypical connections between parts of the brain. Some of those connections may not be quite wide enough, so they're like two-lane country roads and not enough information goes through, but you also get connections that go the other way, and they're not like 4-lane highways or 8-lane highways, but they're like 16-lane highways. So music can help to balance these things out. So how do you teach music? Let's take a quick look at some of what I do when I teach music. Ethan, come over here. Give Mommy the straw. A, B, C, D, E.
For autistic people who were diagnosed when autism was unknown, there was little support. Their parents, for the most part, were on their own.
Take an A. Take an A from here. Ethan, A. We eventually get to a stage where, without talking about it, he's reading music. So when we get to piano book number 1, he'll already know how to read it and understand it, and it will be friendly. I remember having piano lessons at age 6, and I think the best thing that I learned from these music lessons was how not to teach children on the autism spectrum how to play music. And I think the goal of intervention is to help that person lead a fulfilling and productive life with the strengths that they have. The potential of those of us with autism is like the potential of anybody else. It's unlimited. So let's use music as a way to access that potential. It's one way to access that potential. My specialty is music. Other people use art. Other people put kids on horses. And other people do other things. So whatever that specialty is, what can we do to access those strengths? So for this particular child, Ethan, this is a schedule that we set up. This is material that you use to developing. It's a word picture schedule. And that helped him prepare what we were going to do. And this schedule would be prepared with him with Ethan, because if we involve the child in the development of the materials, as we're going to look at in a little bit, that makes it more meaningful for that child. So let's take a look at developing those materials. Here's one possible way of teaching music notation. And an important concept of using these materials is that they're readily available. You can go down to the local Walmart, CVS, convenience store and get this stuff, and it's likely that just about everybody's house has this stuff anyways, or at least most of it. So you start off with regulation size blank sheets of paper, different color pens and pencils, clear plastic tape, scissors, get yourself a nice keyboard, and we're off to the races. And again, music has both inter and extra musical goals. And now we're looking at the extra musical goals. And getting back to music therapy and getting back to teaching music, some people draw an artificial distinction between music therapists who use extra musical goals to help people on the spectrum or people in general. And then there are the musicians over here, and music therapists are musicians as well, but people who are teaching music, if I'm teaching you how to play an instrument, well, then I'm teaching you how to play music, and that's something that's totally different. However, they are both similar in that both work to develop a human-to-human connection. Whether you're a composer, whether you're a music therapist, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a performer, or anything else related to music. So let's let the fun begin. And we'll start out with a blank piece of paper, and whether it's just asking a person, gee, can you help me to draw some straight lines with a ruler? Maybe I'll have to demonstrate. Maybe I'll have to provide hand over hand. But whatever it is, we get these lines drawn on a piece of paper. What is the first letter of the alphabet? What's the second? Can you write these down? And whatever support is needed. And I find that the individuals I work with on the spectrum, they're all over the spectrum. Some of them are pre-verbal, just like with Ethan, who we saw. And it goes all the way to the other end, where I have students who just talk too much. And just like the rest of the population, some of the individuals I work with, they could be professional musicians if they so chose. And then there are others who work harder at it. And then there are some that I still have yet to figure out how to teach. So we get this piece of paper ready. So we're working on writing, we're working on the alphabet, we're working on drawing lines. That's the extra musical aspect of things. Now we get these yellow stickies, the regulation 2x3 inch. And gee, can you help me draw some more lines? And soon we've drawn a line, a horizontal line, and divided the top into 8. So why 8? Because it's the third power of 2. No, that's not why. The reason why I choose 8, well, there's 2 reasons. One is, once we cut these things out, they're small enough to stick between the black keys of the piano so they don't get in the way when you're playing the keyboard. And secondly, you don't need to measure if you have good visual processing, because all you have to do is divide it in half and then divide the 2 halves in half again and then divide those into half again. And then you've got 8. So by hook or by crook, whether it's hand over hand or just asking the student to do it, we've got all these straight lines set up. Then I'll write an A, and can I have the student finish them off? Can you write A's through all of those little squares? And one thing you want to make sure is that those little squares are where the sticky part of the paper is, because you're going to cut the bottom off. Oh, and sometimes we'll split it, 4 B's and 4 C's, and we put them all. We cut off the bottom, and then we cut those little thingies out, and we've got these little tabs that we stick on this piece of paper over here. And that serves as a sort of repository or bank for notes that we're going to use in a little bit to explore the keyboard. This is something the piano teachers tell you not to do. Don't write the notes on the keys. Don't put little stickies on them. Don't do any of that, because the student's never going to memorize the keys. Well, I suppose someday I'll come across a student who will have not been able to memorize the keys because I pulled this stunt. So I guess it could happen. But until that does, I'm going to keep doing this. Well, what is that first letter of the alphabet? Oh, it's an A. See that note way on the left. What do you think should go there? And if it's a full-size keyboard, it will be an A. If it's a 61-note keyboard, then it's going to be a C. But whatever it is, well, gee, could you take one of the A sticker and put it right on the note near the black key? Oh, gee, that's great. Oh, what comes after A? B. Good, take a B. Put it on. What comes after B? Can you finish them off? Great. And then soon you have the kid sticking them on the keys. And because many of us with autism tend to need to complete things, that's the disrupted system thing going on. Well, let's use it instead of fighting against it. And once you get the student started, it's kind of like winding up a little bunny rabbit, a toy or something, like an Energizer bunny. And they keep going. You can leave. You can go to the restroom. You can get a cup of coffee. You can come back, and they're still at it. So let's use that to our advantage. And then we can start exploring the keyboard. Gee, can you find a C? Can you push it? Can you find another C? How about another one? Can you find a G? Can you find an E? And again, depending upon where the child is developmentally, how many C's can you find? Can you count them all? Can you push them down? 1, 2, 3, so we get 8 of those. Now what about an F? Can you find an F? How many F's are there? Can you find them all? And soon the child is getting familiar with the keyboard. And then as additional, you might say, buttressing of the concepts, or reinforcing the concepts, well, at the end of the lesson, it's time to put all this stuff away. So we take the little tabs off the keys and put them back on the piece of paper. And then we'll begin the next session by taking them off the piece of paper and putting them back on the keyboard. And an important thing about these materials is that this is something that the student can either take home with them and do on a keyboard with their parents. And when I give these music lessons, I insist that one or both parents are with me, because who's an expert on their child? Parent is the expert on their child. And also, number 2, the parent learns what we're doing, and they can do the same thing that I'm doing at home. And then third is that it helps prevent what I call therapist dependence. So I'm working with the child does this stuff with me, but not for anybody else. How many of you have seen that? So immediately I'll involve the other person with the child, and it becomes a gang of 3 or a gang of 4. And sometimes I'll have the child going to one of the parents, because I'll have given the parents a G. Oh, take the G from your parents. Take the C and give it to your father. Go to your mother. What do they have? What is it? Oh, it's a C. And in that way you're involving the parent as well, and it doesn't allow therapist dependence to take place. You can have fun with it. Some students do really well on the keyboard. Others do well on this thing. And it depends, again, on the individual. It depends on their preference. Usually I start either on the recorder or the keyboard. The keyboard is good because everything is just out there and in front of you. You don't need to have the greatest fine motor control to get something out of a piano keyboard, as long as you can manage to hit the note. Whereas with a recorder, well, you're only dealing with one note at a time, so that's a positive. And you can also work on breath control, which is helpful for many on the spectrum. So anyways, back to the keyboard. How we draw a treble clef, won't make a big deal about it. We'll do it hand over hand, or I'll model one and they'll draw it. However we do it, we get that on there. We draw the 5 lines of the staff. Usually I'll pop in a 6th line, a dashed line for where the middle C is. I'll take one of those little yellow stickies, or maybe we'll just write it right on the staff. The middle line's a B. What comes after B? Great. What comes after C? So we can run it all the way up. Now, what is harder for many people with autism to conceive of is what comes before B. And that can be a little bit harder. It's easier to conceive of what happens after as opposed to before, but perhaps by presenting it visually like this, that can help the student understand the concepts. Can you take one of the G's off the piece of paper and stick it right on the staff, right on the G line? Oh, that's great. Can you take a couple more? You see the G over there? Can you push the G on the key? How many G's are there? Oh, there's 3. How many times should you push the key? Now, I'm not going to tell anybody that the kid's reading notation, but that's what he's doing. Depending upon where they are developmentally, you can spell words. G, can you play those? B, A, G. And that can send you off to hot cross buns, 3 blind mice, and all kinds of other things. And soon we're playing little tunes. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star is a common one that we play. And they still don't know that they're reading music. I'm not going to tell them either, because then they might stop. It's sort of like the idea that we all know that animals can talk in English or whatever language of the country they're living in, but they refuse to talk because they know that if we hear them talking, we're going to put them to work. So that's why they keep silent. There's a program in Boston, the Boston Conservatory, which I helped them set up, which is devoted to giving music lessons to children on the autism spectrum. And every student going through their music education program is involved in this, and they learn how to teach people with autism how to play instruments, and that's great. So as I said, keyboards is one way to go about it. Another way to go about it, here's a slightly different way. The same sheets of paper, same materials, but this time, let's suppose we use the recorder. And let's draw a nice grid, an 8 by 10 matrix. And then I'll scatter some letters. I'll just write them down. What do you think should go after that second A? Can you finish it off for me? What letter is after A? And so on. And again, the need for completion. Use that need for completion. Use that need for completing the system according to Miller method theory to your advantage, instead of it having to be something that you have to work against. So getting back to the recorder. What might be a challenge in playing this instrument? And what about those tiny little holes? So number 1, you got the fine motor control, and what else? You got breath control, so all the embouchure type stuff. But let's assume they got that, and you're getting really close. One is dealing with the holes, and many students may not be able to feel when the holes are covered. And then what do you do when you have to play a high D or some other higher note when the hole in the back has to be only partially closed? And how do you just feel where the holes are? Well, again, go down to your favorite Walmart or go to your school supply house, supply closet if you're a teacher, and get some friendly reinforcements. And you can even color code them. You don't have to just use white. And some students will be fine with just one reinforcer, or you may have to really build them up with like 5 or 7 or 10. Well, whatever it is, that will help them feel the holes. And then they'll be on the recorder. Again, it's a matter of what the student wants to play, what works well for the student. I remember starting a student on the recorder. He was nonverbal, and he wasn't that interested. He wasn't doing that well. It was like he was putting up with the lessons, but that was it. But what he did do is he kept looking behind him like this. Well, what was behind him? There was a piano. All right, let's go to the piano. There was no rule that people with autism have to play the recorder. And just to see if he was interested and had some facility for the piano, I did a sort of music therapy-ish type of thing. And I played some tunes that had some strong chord progressions and some strong beats, and just put him in the bass and said, okay, accompany me. And he was accompanying me very rhythmically. And I'd speed up, and he'd speed up. I'd slow down, he'd slow down. All right, I guess he's telling me that he wants to learn to play the piano and not the recorder. So until that rule is passed that all people with autism have to learn to play a recorder, then we could just jump right to the piano. So it's important to have flexibility. Flexibility in how the student learns. And they'll often learn in ways and process in ways that you don't expect. I had a student who I asked her to count the white keys. So she counted them all up. Okay, count the black keys. And now she's touching groups of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, and soon she knew how many groups of 2s there were and how many groups of 3s there were, and then there was the one left over way at the end because it was a full keyboard. And she created an algebraic formula and put it all together. But suppose I had said, no, you've got to count them one at a time. 1, 2, 3. And what are you doing starting from the right anyways? You should start from the left. So it's important to sometimes just sit back and see what that student is up to before you say anything, because you might learn something from them. Well, here's another video of a student who I worked with.
For people like Stephen Shore, who has autism, it was sometimes hard to let his parents know what those desires were.
I remember when I was about 4 years old, I was playing with my brother on a swing set. And we were playing, and we were doing parallel play, which means we were just doing similar activities together, but not doing anything with each other. And I decided to hang upside down by my knees across a metal bar. And that metal bar was incredibly cold, and that frustrated me to no end. And since I didn't have the verbiage to say that, what I ended up doing was running over to a flagstone and banging my head. And that's often that's a common cause of self-abusive behavior. Sensory issues. And that is failure to, or an inability to communicate one's wants and needs. Whereas most children just would have said, those bars are really cold.
In time, Stephen's parents found a powerful way to connect with their son.
When I became nonverbal at 18 months, my mother and grandmother and other people would sing to me a lot. And of course there was always music in the background. So I've been engaged with music since I was very young. And then my first formal experience with it, with lessons, started with piano instruction at 6 years of age. And they didn't work out too well because you had a typical teacher teaching a person who wasn't typical at all and that learned differently.
Stephen decided to improve that situation for future generations of autistic musicians.
One reason why I teach people on the autism spectrum to play musical instruments is because it provides a very valuable real-life skill that they can use to integrate into society. It's a very typical thing to pick up your trombone or your trumpet and join a community band or orchestra, and it's a great way in.
Music has also been important to Stephen's personal life. He met his wife when they were both music students at Boston University.
After a while, she invited me to a Chinese New Year's party, and my liking people from other cultures and liking to eat, I was all there, so I went.
When you met, could you communicate well in English?
Somewhat, because when we met, she had only been in the United States for about 18 months, so her English wasn't that good. And for people on the autism spectrum where verbal communication is often a type of second language, I guess the both of us were sort of used to finding other ways to communicate. and other ways to find out what the other person wanted. So that may have even been an advantage to being on the autism spectrum. So using music as communication. In this case, meeting someone from the People's Republic of China, and my Chinese was non-existent and her English was pretty bad, but somehow we figured some things out. So the other part of the presentation involves the idea of SWAT, and it's not, as you can see, it's not special weapons and tactics, but special ways and techniques for educating individuals on the autism spectrum. And we're going to take a look at those, because what I often find is that educators get lost in a sea of accommodations. There's so many of them out there, thousands or tens of thousands of them. What is the right accommodation, and how do we use it? How do we customize it for that individual? So what I find helpful is to divide these accommodations into these 9 categories, these 9 domains, with the idea that each accommodation is going to fit into one or more of these domains. So let's take a look at a few of these domains and how this might apply, particularly in a music situation. Well, size is a common one. We look at size. How much information, a quantity of information, are we expecting the student to learn, to master? So let's say it's scales. Instead of requiring 6, all right, I'm going to drop it down to 3. And what I find is, while everybody does well in my band, at the end of the month or whatever the period of time is, and mastering those 6 scales up to 3 sharps and 3 flats, I've got this individual who can perhaps only do 3 sharps or 3 flats. After he's transitioned into the class, he does fine. However, will running at half productivity serve him well as an adult in the work world? Will it serve this person well in higher education? And it won't. So what I might wonder is, perhaps this person just needs this information provided in smaller chunks. And maybe, instead of giving just 2 weeks, instead of giving 2 weeks like I do for everybody, I want 3 sharps and flats by the end of 2 weeks. I'm going to say to this child, give me up to 3 sharps at the end of next week. And then the following week, let's do the flats. So what this person really needed was information in smaller chunks. And now this person is producing at the same level as everybody else. And this curriculum modification has been upgraded to what is known as an accommodation, because I have the same expectations as everybody else, but I've had to shift some things around so that they could get to this level. And then the question is, how can this instruction be engineered to benefit the entire class? Well, maybe I should have everybody doing these sets of 3 once a week. And that way there's only one testing scheme, you might say, instead of 2. And that's an important tenet of universal design. I'm expanding my curriculum to access more people. Time is another one. Usually what we do with time is we just throw more time at it. Time and a half, unlimited time, double time. And sometimes that's what's needed, but sometimes what's really needed is how to manage time. The executive functioning component. Increasing, decreasing the amount of time needed to learn a piece of music, individualizing a timeline, just writing out what is the protocol for learning a piece of music anyways. And maybe all the students would benefit. Would all the students benefit perhaps from receiving a handout on what is the procedure for learning a piece of music? Starting out with the key signature, looking at the harder parts, maybe practicing those to get them down, whatever it might be. And maybe having a student write that out on a big poster that I'm going to put on the wall. So getting as much student involvement as possible. So these are some of the things that I look at. Participation is another, and this is a big one. Adapting the extent the learner is actively involved in a task. So let us suppose we have a student, and I've seen situations like this. The student is included in a chorus, but they have a real hard time just being quiet or even standing still. And they're a pacer type student. If you let a student loose in this room, one of these pacer students, they wouldn't necessarily run out the door, but they'd just be walking all around. And if they're not walking all around and they're staying still when they can, then they're making a lot of noise, vocalizing. We're not quite sure what the vocalizations are, but they're making a lot of noise. And in this situation, when the student moved, the vocalizations would go down. Anybody have any idea why that might happen? So when they stop walking, they're vocalizing and making noises. It's a sensory piece, right? Many of us with autism have difficulty with body to environmental awareness. Where are you in relation to the environment? Everybody touch the back of your chair. All right, you're done good. All right, you can let go now. How many of you took for granted you just knew where the back of your chair was, or did you have to turn around to look for it before you could touch it? So you have pretty good body to environmental awareness. For people with autism, we may not even know where that back of the chair is. We may not know where the edge of this stage is. You're getting nervous. People with, you might say, a mild version of this issue, well, anybody who you know who's a bull in a china shop, for example, or doesn't know their own strengths, it's like a lighter version of that. But for some people with autism, it can be extreme. So what is the best way to figure out where you are? Well, one is to run into walls and crash into them. You know any kids who do that? And they very well just might be trying to figure out where they are in the environment to do that. And if you can't move, the next best thing is to make a noise. And that helps differentiate you from the environment. So whatever the reason is, and we may not know what the reason is in a particular case, and I might be entirely wrong with this particular student. I know when the student is still, or as still as they can, standing in the chorus, they're making noise and it's disruptive. When they're moving, and, well, it's disrupting the class in another way, but at least they're quiet. So by asking the question, what can the student do, versus what the student can't do, and focusing on that, what can they do? Well, they can walk, they can move. Is there something else they can do that's related to the activity? They're not going to be singing like everybody else, but it's related. And might that be playing a bass drum to keep the tempo? It might be a total disaster, but it also might work. Or some other percussion. Might the student be particularly good at improvisational movement? So let's put them in the front of the chorus. And I don't want them to be alone either, so I'm going to take these 4 people over here as volunteers, and now we've got a group of 5 at the front doing improvisational movement during the performance, and now it's part of the performance. We know that she really likes to walk. And this is an interesting case because this is a student that my wife had. I don't know if she had autism or not, it doesn't matter, but what she did is she stuck a flag in the kid's hand. And it was a concert of international music. So music from Portugal, marching all up and down around the auditorium with a Portuguese flag. When it was time to sing a song of France, then it was a French flag. And the kid was as happy as could be, doing what they do best. The chorus was happy because they were singing well, they were doing what they did best, and the two of them complemented each other. And it was a very successful performance. So what we're looking at as a common goal, what is our goal? The goal is meaningful participation of the individual on the autism spectrum in the music curriculum, whether it's learning how to play an instrument, whether it's playing in an ensemble, whether it's involvement in general music, whatever it might be. And by looking at what the student is able to do, as opposed to focusing on what they can't do and then trying to fix it, we'll be a lot better off. So I wish to thank you for your participation and for all the work that you're doing to help those of us on the autism spectrum lead fulfilling and productive lives to our greatest potential. And I see we have 120 seconds left, so there's time for a couple of questions. All right, right here.
Try putting Braille on the keyboard. Have you ever run into an incident like that where you Braille the letters on the keyboard?
Well, I haven't had.
Teach them the letters in Braille and possibly say them verbally.
So the question is, we have an individual on the spectrum, or maybe even not on the spectrum, but they're blind or they have visual impairments, and they can't read letters, but they can read Braille.
They really like.
And they really like music, and they like the piano. So maybe, that's like one of those things. Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you putting Braille? That's a great idea. And just as we talked a little bit earlier about writing letters on little stickies and putting them on the keys, maybe you have to make the adaptation, the accommodation of putting Braille on the keys instead of letters. So that's a great idea. Oh, well, use it. Use it and wear it out. I saw you here next.
My daughter just wants to complete the alphabet rather than just stopping at
Mm-hmm. It does come up. And that's why we start out with those squares on the piece of paper. And you might have noticed that the one on the square on the bottom was twice as big as the others because there is no H, except if you're in Germany and you do have an H. But we're not in Germany. And so that's one way to help with that. Sometimes I'll just have 8 squares, evenly sized squares, and then in the 8th square, well, I wouldn't put H, but I might put the word extra. And then we just put some other things in there. Maybe some other musical symbols that we write out. Don't talk about them too much, but just kind of write them, and you just kind of stick them over there. They're extras. So that's a good way to transition into the idea that we've got these 7 letters, and then in music we like to be very, very economical. We're very green, and we recycle these letters over and over. Yeah. And there was one question here.
I don't get time. Rhythm. Rhythm is hard for these kids. My son takes piano lessons. It's hard for them to get a rhythm sometimes. Do you have any tips to practice rhythm?
Well, just like everybody else, some kids are great with rhythm. Some have a really hard time with rhythm. And sometimes it will help to kind of graph it out. Sometimes I'll create a numeric code where 1 might equal 4 beats, like a whole note, and 2 beats, and so on. That might be another way. You might be able to color code it. Sometimes you have a student who has a hard time with rhythm, but getting kinesthetic with them can help. So let's work on clapping the rhythms, or saying the rhythms, or beating them with a stick, or something like that. Then how do you represent a rest if you're clapping a rhythm? 1, 2, 3. You did it. Do it again. 1, 2, 3. Because you've got to do something when you're doing nothing. So that's why you got to split your hands out like that. All right. Well, it's been great talking with you. Great questions. We're 2 minutes over time, but I'll be here for the rest of the day to answer questions and part of tomorrow. Thank you very much.